Welcome to one of the most remote and wild regions on the planet, the Kamchatka Peninsula. It's big, it's got volcanoes, earthquakes, harsh winters, plenty of wildlife, and not a lot of people. This part of Russia is not for the faint-hearted. So today, let's explore this absolutely stunning corner of our planet. Hello, and welcome to 7 Facts. First, let's look at the history. People belonging to various groups have made Kamchatka their home long before the Russians ever came here. The oldest remains that have been uncovered are about 17,000 years old. That's in the Stone Age, in case you didn't know. It was much later that the Russians reached Kamchatka, obviously, in 1651. And they didn't just find an uninhabited land. The Itelmens, Ainu, Koryaks and Chuvans were already present and are considered to be the natives of Kamchatka. Collectively, they're known as the Kamchadals, although this name refers to the natives who assimilated with the Russians, and it comes from the Koryak language meaning men of the Far East. Or it could mean something else, as there are about 20 versions of the origin of Kamchatka. But anyway, starting from 1651, Russian explorers started to come here and established forts. However, their exploration of the land wasn't easy. Several expeditions failed and their members killed, attacked by the local Koryaks. The Russian response was almost always the same: find, attack, and destroy local villages. This is pretty much how the first 50 years of Kamchatkan exploration went. Explore, build settlements, be attacked, attack back. This somewhat of a routine changed in 1705, when there was a general breakdown of order. There were numerous mutinies and native wars all over the peninsula. The chaos extended all the way to the north of Kamchatka, and the hard lives of the people just got harder. These troubled times lasted for decades, and taking back control and settling down the natives was a very slow process. During this time, countless natives were murdered in the most cruel ways, and countless Russians were speared and burned to death in traps. The last mention of resistance in Kamchatka was in 1756, so for a period of 51 years, the Russian Empire had basically no control over these lands. This wasn't the end of troubles though. 12 years later, a major smallpox epidemic swept through the native population, decimating their numbers. Those who survived were few, less than 10,000, and most of them were now easily assimilated into Russian culture. The next chapter in Kamchatka's history was much leaner, although not completely eventless. But let's fast forward to 1945. This is the year World War II ended, and from an outside perspective at least, Kamchatka went dark. By that, I mean that the region became a military zone and access to this place was restricted even to Soviet citizens. During the second half of the 20th century, there were about 400,000 people living in Kamchatka, and each and every one of them had a special military clearance. If you're wondering why Kamchatka was closed off, well, there are many reasons, but the main one is that for Russia, this was the closest they could get to US territory. In these times, there were secretive nuclear submarine bases and military bases and ballistic missile launch sites, and many of them are still in operation, by the way. The Soviets guarded this land so much that in 1983 they shot down a Korean jumbo jet that veered off course, fearing it was an American reconnaissance airplane. It was only in 1990 that regular Soviet citizens were allowed to enter Kamchatka, and in 1991 the first foreign citizens arrived. But this secretive, dangerous game of military might had its upsides. Kamchatka remained an untouched, unpolluted natural haven. The flora and fauna of the peninsula flourished all those decades, and that's what we'll discuss next. The grasses throughout Kamchatka are so tall and succulent without exception that it is difficult to find the likes of them in the entire Russian Empire. Stepan Krasheninnikov, a Russian explorer, wrote that in the 18th century during the Second Kamchatka expedition, and he wasn't wrong. There are thousands of plant species that to this day thrive in the peninsula, and many of them are nowhere to be found on Earth but here. Because Kamchatka was closed off for half a century and there was no forced industrialization here, much of the land remained in its natural state. The absolute beauty of Kamchatka is hard to be equaled. What about the wildlife? Well, if you venture to the seashores, you'll most definitely encounter seals, sea lions, sea otters, and you have a good chance to spot some killer whales. Not to mention the 600 or so fish species found in the seas that surround the peninsula. Look up to the sky and start counting the 220 or so bird species that live in Kamchatka. But probably the most famous inhabitants of Kamchatka are the brown bears, and there are about 14,000 of them. You simply cannot go into this wilderness without proper protection. Pretty much anywhere you can come face to face with brown bears here, and they are not at all friendly. So no, what these guys are doing in this picture, that's a no-no for you. The next thing we have to talk about when it comes to Kamchatka are the volcanoes. And oh my, there are plenty of those. This is the most volcanically active area of the entire Eurasian continent. As of right now, there are 29 active volcanoes in a peninsula the size of New Zealand. Count the dormant volcanoes too and you get to 160. Add the extinct ones and you surpass 400. This impressive and, let's face it, frightening collection of volcanoes caught the attention of UNESCO too, who designated these volcanoes a World Heritage Site. If you're wondering why there are so many volcanoes in Kamchatka, the reason is actually quite simple. The peninsula is a very active part of the infamous Pacific Ring of Fire, a nearly continuous series of subduction zones where earthquakes and volcanoes are pretty much the norm. Speaking of earthquakes, Kamchatka is no stranger to these events. Right off the east coast lies the subduction zone where two tectonic plates meet and the seafloor drops to nearly 10,000 meters. What this means is that you get a lot of earthquakes here. The vast majority of them are weak enough to not be felt by humans, but some are legendarily powerful. For instance, in 1737, 1923 and 1952, so-called megathrust earthquakes shook Kamchatka with magnitudes of 8, 8.5 and 9 respectively. All of them also caused tsunamis. More recently, a chain of more shallow earthquakes were recorded in April 2006. The 7.7 magnitude quake was followed by powerful aftershocks with magnitudes of 4, 5, 6 and 6.6. These aftershocks occurred over a period of more than 2 weeks. So Kamchatka is one of the most geologically active places on Earth, and living here takes a bit of courage. Thankfully, the place is sparsely populated, so most of the time there are no human casualties. Most of the time. Okay, so Kamchatka is beautiful and wild, but it also seems to want to kill you at every step. But what about the climate? What's the weather like here? Well, it depends. The coastal areas have relatively mild winters and cool summers, but inland it gets colder. But no matter where you are, you can pretty much expect 5 months of winter, or 6, or 7 as you get closer to the north. Once winter arrived, get ready to chill with temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius. If that's too cold for you, get to the coast. You'll only have to bear a balmy -10 degrees. Oh, and snowfalls and blizzards are frequent, so you better know your way around. During summer, it rains quite a lot and temperatures range between 15 and 30 degrees Celsius. If all of this sounds extreme, well, it is, but people have been living here since times immemorial. And tourism in Kamchatka is booming, despite these harsh conditions. So it seems that Kamchatka is indeed a place of contrasts and remains one of the masterpieces of Mother Nature on Earth. I hope this video was interesting enough to have inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. You can leave your comments downstairs, and you can also check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.